Have a word of prayer. Lord God, you are present with us as you are with us all the time, and we are so grateful. Now, there are some folks, and we want to remember in our prayers. We also want to lift up Jody and Daniel as they deal with their own sickness and all those needs that are unspoken. Man, Lord, you know what's going on in our hearts, and so you know what we need. So what I ask is that you send your presence here, help us to be open as we look at your word and excited as we apply it. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. Amen. Now, Jody told, I know y'all have been watching series. And what was the series? Chosen. And it's about Jesus, his life? Okay. And did it go through his whole life?
We haven't got. We're not done yet.
You're not done. You're not done. So you're sort of midway in his life. Okay.
There's 7 seasons of it.
Okay.
3 has not been released yet.
Okay. Because I was curious if they did his whole life in season 1. I don't know what you do in season 2. You know that.
It showed him choosing his disciples, and we got to know the disciples. And
okay.
The last one was the Sermon on the Mount was going to begin.
Oh, okay. Well, when I talked to Jody, and she asked me to do this, and it's always a lot of fun. She said she was going to pick up some or somebody, I don't know, was going to do some individuals like Nicodemus and Mary Magdalene and those that you'd run across. And I don't know when are they dropping the next season?
I don't know.
They're filming it now, and I think it'll not maybe.
Oh, so you're talking about?
Yeah.
It may be in the spring. Could be like 6 months. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So anyway, that's what she said she was going to look at, and so that's what I'm going to help. We're going to kind of look at today. And we may do it in the future if you want. So we'll look at the figure of well, first, as you've watched the series, what are some of the things that you've learned about Jesus? What are some of the things that you learned? Because I haven't seen it. So what are some of the things that you've learned about Jesus that you didn't know?
That we didn't know.
Yeah.
Oh.
I enjoyed some of the scenes where it showed that he had fun.
Okay.
He and the disciples enjoyed each other and had fun.
That
was just interesting to me.
Yeah, me too.
This isn't something necessarily that I really learned, but I had just been so touched by watching and seeing how he was with the people and how he drew them in and how he chose them. And me feeling chosen.
Okay.
It has made me feel very special and blessed.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's cool. What were some surprises as you were watching it?
Matthew was a great surprise to me. I didn't realize that there were all different kinds of personalities. I kind of just thought they were like, a group of people with the same ambitions and the same things, and they're just like this hodgepodge of things that have to learn to get together, just like we did, and learn how to live together, and just like we do. And that was really exciting for me to see the different personalities conflict and then resolve.
Okay. So that was something you really found kind of surprising.
Well, yeah. Because my mind says everybody got along together. They're in the book, they're all together.
Yeah, so everybody who has halos should get along. Yeah. If you got halos around,
and the different personalities clash just like you do without God's Spirit.
Okay.
And I think what I found the most interesting is the fact that he's portrayed as so down to earth.
Okay.
And when he talks to people and works with them, it's not like it isn't like he's a teacher, but it's not like he's I don't know how to say what I mean. He just listens.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like he's coming from up here,
exactly.
talking down.
Yes, he listens to what they're saying.
And I find it interesting that he's able to communicate so well with different stratas of life.
Mm-hmm.
You have the priests that he can interact with, and then you have the people in the lower strata that he interacts with just as well. And there's no reserve to any of them. It's just, he's very, very open and honest with everybody and is able to express, a lofty platitude and something down to earth.
Okay, good. Now, you've encountered some characters.
Yes.
And so, well, yeah, characters in more than one way, right? What were some of the characters that, at this point, and if you're at the sermon, you're still pretty, there's a lot of seasons following that. There's a lot going to follow that. What were some of them that you, just by what you've seen, are important to the story? Some obvious ones,
Well, the tax
characters.
collector. Remember I asked you if
Okay.
he had ADHD back then, or
Okay.
ADD, because...
As he was presented, he was.
Yes, it
yeah,
looks
okay.
like he's... has-
Matthew?
Okay.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
had autism.
Yes,
So-
that's the word, autism.
Okay.
Autism. Certain things about him reminds me of my grandson. When people are talking and different things. I have a 19-year-old autistic grandson
okay.
who is enrolled at Slippery Rock University and doing fantastic.
Outstanding.
Praise
That's
the Lord.
really wonderful.
Oh, it's, wow. Knocked my socks off.
As well it should.
Every day, I prayed, I know God can do all things, but I will tell you what, wow.
God uses things, but he worked hard. That boy worked hard to get to where he is.
He did, his mom, my daughter.
And that's right, family did.
Mom
too.
is awesome.
Yeah.
She studied those type of things and then had an autistic child and everything and anything. Stopped the bullies. She's a force to be reckoned with, and he is, wow, and God is just blessing us in so many ways.
Outstanding. Well, who would, yeah.
Well, Nicodemus, I find it sad that he came so close to accepting Jesus and then backed off because of the pressures of the world.
Well, we're going to talk about Nicodemus.
Okay.
So that is excellent that you named him. So we'll file that away because that's the character we're looking at. Now, obviously, the most important character in the story is
Jesus.
Jesus. I mean, duh. That's so Jesus is an important character, right? Who else? Important, really big time character.
Well, the thing that's interesting is the part that the women play.
Okay.
The part that, you have, Jesus' mother comes and she seems to balance the dynamics of the whole thing. She keeps everybody calm. It seemed like that to me. And then you have Mary Magdalene, where she seemed to be, very intelligent. She knew how to read. She knew how to, to do, and is able to teach the other women. And it's almost like all the culture stigmas of being a woman, Jesus eliminated those.
Okay, good. Outstanding. Well, like I said, we're going to look at Nicodemus today. So that's great. And what I was sort of fishing. This is no pun intended.
And I knew where
no, kind of like Peter, James, John, because you've run into those. He's called so the major characters, and then some of the characters that aren't, when you look at the biblical story, aren't prominent. Not quite as prominent, and sometimes those kind of get lost in the shuffle. So we want to pick up some of those and look at the biblical kind of the background, because when you look at the character Nicodemus is only, well, first, when you look at any kind of presentation, and it doesn't matter whether it's a play or a film or a series, the writers are making an interpretation. They are creating a story based on stories. Because that's what the Gospels are, stories. So they're creating a dramatic story based on these stories, okay, that they have in front of them. And what they generally do, and this is what they all do. And it doesn't matter what you're looking at, whether it was something made a long time ago, made yesterday. What they'll do is they'll do what's called conflating. Have you ever heard that word before, conflate? When you conflate, you bring, and we talk about it in Sunday school,
Yeah.
you bring in the others. So you have, instead of having 4 stories, you have 1 story. So you bring in a little bit of Matthew, bring in a little bit of John, bring in a little bit of, well, Mark is already there. Bring in a little bit of Luke, and you create 1 story, which is, then we're kind of getting an impression of who Jesus is, or who what this narrative is, and that's a plus. The negative on the downside is you lose what Mark has to say about Jesus. How did Mark view Jesus? How did Matthew view Jesus? How did Luke? How did John? Because John is really different when you look at the Gospel of John and compare it to the other 3. You kind of lose that a little bit because they're kind of choosing what they put in their Gospels, and they do that for a reason. So, you get the whole story, which is good. You lose a little bit of that flavor. The different kind of barbecue. I'm a southeasterner, so we eat barbecue with kind of has a vinegar taste, and then you go further west and you get that sweet sauce on the barbecue, which Southerners think is awful. But it's barbecue. It's both barbecue, so you get a little bit of that change, and you lose that tiny bit when you conflate. Okay, now Nicodemus is only mentioned in the Gospel of John, and it's only 3 passages in John. So Nicodemus is a John character, and it fits into John is going to portray him in his gospel in a way that fits in with how he's presenting Jesus Christ. And if you've ever read John and read Mark, boy, they are presenting Jesus in very, very different ways. Where Mark has nobody know who he is until the end. In John, people know he's the Son of God in chapter 1. And that's a real big difference, between the 2 stories, the 2 accounts. And so Nicodemus is a John figure in his story. And so how his presentation is shaped is going to be kind of dictated by John's theology. Now, there's a couple of things before we look at, and therefore, before we can look at Nicodemus, there might be something we might want to think about some of the things that John does as he presents Jesus Christ in his gospel. Because each evangelist does something a little bit different. Okay? All of them are writers. And one of the other things, and I talk about it with Sunday school, file in the back of your head that these guys are writing on, do you know what they were writing on?
Grease paper.
They were writing on papyrus. Papyrus. Do you know what papyrus is?
It's a plane.
It is. It's the skin of a reed. A reed, for crying out. A reed. So they cut the skin off.
Peel it.
Yeah, paste it together, and that's what they're writing on. Either that or they're writing on what's called vellum, which is animal skin. They're writing on the 2. It is very, very expensive. Mm-hmm. Paper isn't introduced into Europe until the 14th century. That's a Chinese development, and that was cheap. Paper, because you can make it out of cloth, any kind of fiber. You can produce paper, a lot of paper. You can't produce a lot of vellum. There aren't enough reeds or people to glue them together to produce a lot. And that's why they had scribes, because scribes were people who could write in a tiny little hand. And if you look at what's written in the ancient world, and there's a reason I'm mentioning this, when you look at what's written in the ancient world, like early copies of the Bible, and they're always copies, it's just lines of letters. They don't even separate words. It's just all capitals, no punctuation. They're not separating words, just lines of letters. Because the papyrus is so precious, you don't want to waste space separating words. That's a waste of space. You don't want to waste space putting in periods and commas and stuff. Question mark. You don't waste space. So it's just, and so you had to hire somebody to write it because they could write with a little teeny hand. But you also had to have somebody read it. It's like getting, a person to do Morse code. I'm listening to Morse code. I got no clue what it means. But you get somebody who knows it, and I'm amazed.
Yeah.
Or sign language, as they're doing the thing, I'm just watching them. And, somebody who knows exactly what they're doing. That's kind of what scribes did. And that's where they were experts in the law, because they wrote it so much. They were the copyists. So they're a professional class. The point I guess I want to make, and I want you to kind of file away in the back of your head, is since papyrus is so valuable, they're not going to include anything that isn't important. When I write something on my computer, which costs what? The computer costs money, but what I'm writing on costs what? Nothing. It's not even paper. It costs me nothing. Man, I can use words right and left. You look at my sermons. I've got knows in there. You got ands in there. I means in there. Well, because it doesn't cost me anything to put it in. Back then, they're not putting stuff in that they don't consider important because it's too expensive for them to do it. They don't have that much stuff that they can just waste words. So we want to approach Scripture that everything in there is in there for a reason. Okay, so that's one of the things important to file, kind of file away. As you look at John's Gospel, and I'll tell you all of this is going to apply to Nicodemus. When you look at John's Gospel, we got 4 different writers. All of them are writing not biographies of Jesus, because that's a Greek word. They are writing euangelion. They are writing Gospels. And I know some of y'all know this because I told you. The word gospel, well, it is. But you know the origin of that good news? What it meant? Literally in Greek. Well, you're in a city, in Athens. You're in Athens. And the Persians are marching. Huge Persian armies marching. And so the Athenian army goes out to meet the Persians in a place called Marathon. Okay? Huge battle. Now, you're sitting in the city, right? If your army loses, what does that mean to you?
You got to get out.
You got a big problem. You got a big problem. Because the army, the Persians are going to come, they're going to lay siege to Athens. And when they lay siege to Athens, what does that mean to you?
You're hungry.
You're hungry. You're going to be eating everything in sight. The value of pets changes when you're a city under siege. You got a big problem. And worse, when you lose, and you will lose. When the army comes over the wall, you got even bigger problems. Because usually armies are paid by whatever they can carry away or get. That's their pay. So you have got a big problem. If your army loses, you are in big, big trouble. And so you're sitting there, you're sweating bullets, right? As your army is 22.6 miles away, fighting the Persians at Marathon. And all of a sudden, and there's no telephone or anything, so you don't know what's going on out there. A guy runs from the battlefield and comes into the city. And he says, "We won." And he runs 22.6, I think, miles, back to Athens. We won. And he drops dead. But we won. When he says we won, that's what the Greeks called euangelion. That was the word for his announcement. Euangelion. Euangelion, that we translate gospel.
Yeah.
So what they're writing, so this is good news, but huge news. This isn't just, well, that's good news. This is big news. This is life-changing news. And that's what they call these works. All the evangelists are calling their works euangelion. So it's not biography. They're not looking to get the facts straight. They're looking to present how Jesus is what? Good news. How this is life-changing. And that's their goal. Like I said, they're not reporters getting facts straight. They are here to show people later, show Christians, how Jesus is good news. Okay, so they're all doing it. So each of the writers have their own techniques, right? And some of the things John uses irony. He loves irony. Now, what is irony? If you say, well, that's ironic, what does that mean? If you say, oh, that's ironic.
Aw. I know what it means.
Well, I mean, we use it all the time.
Yeah.
You know, well, that's ironic.
It goes against what you thought would be.
Yeah, something that kind of goes against what you thought, or it's something kind of with a little twist to it. If somebody says something that they really don't know, they really don't. What they say isn't important, but all of a sudden it's really profound. You say, "Wow, that's ironic." That he was aware of that. Because how would he know? Well, he didn't know, but he said it. And that's irony. We see in the Gospel of John irony everywhere. John loves using irony, and he uses it to make points. So he does a lot of that. Something else John uses, and again we're going to see this with Nicodemus, and we file it away. John loves contrast, symbolic contrast, like in particular light and dark. John uses light and dark a lot in his gospel. Now, when you're reading, even without looking at John, if something is light, if he uses light as an image, how would you interpret it? Just now. Uplifting, good. John calls Jesus, none of the other evangelists do. John calls Jesus what?
The light of the world.
The light of the world. And brought light in the world, preferred darkness to the light. John loves playing with light and dark. We see it all through his Gospels. The other evangelists don't do that. John does. This is a big deal for John. And again, it's to make these symbolic points. So when we see light and dark, for John, we're thinking, what other meaning might this have? Why would he be using this? Again, since papyrus is so valuable, why would he mention something is in the light or something is in the dark? Why would he do it? Maybe it's a symbolic, maybe it's a little message there. Okay? Something else John uses, and again, this is in the Nicodemus story, and then we're going to dig into it. John loves wordplay. In John, he loves to play with words. And we see that, I'll give you an example. And we often, and that's why reading just the English is sometimes a little challenging, because it's, this is written in Greek. The Gospels are written in Greek. And they're translated and translated and translated. And when you translate, you change meaning. Because you go, Eskimos have 100 words for snow. We have how many? 1. But the Eskimos have all these words because they live with snow all the time. I'll give you an example. We're going to see another one in what we look at. One of the more confusing passages in John is in the 21st chapter. And you may have heard it before. Jesus is talking to Peter. Resurrection's already occurred. Talking to Peter. And he says, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, I love you. And Jesus says,
do you love me?
He first says, feed my lambs. And then Jesus says again, do you love me? And Peter says what? Yes, I love you. And Peter says, tend my sheep. And then Jesus says, do you love me? And Peter says, Lord, you know I love you. Then he says, feed my sheep. Now that's in John. And we say, well, all right, I guess that's okay. It's kind of repetitive. Well, in Greek, there are 2 words in the New Testament that are translated love. One is verbs, but they also have nouns too. One is phileo. Phileo. And phileo love is friendship love. And I mean, it's an emotional love. I guess that's, husbands and wives. Well, most husbands and wives feel phileo. Sometimes if you've been married a long, I don't want to get into that. You feel a phileo. You feel emotional. There's an emotional connection. Philadelphia, phileo, adelphos, brotherly love. That's Greek. So phileo is this, is an emotional. And when I run across this, if I'm ever translating a text, when I hit phileo, I'll say translate it like instead of love, because that's what it is. Then there's another, agapeo, or agape is the noun, is love, but it's an interesting kind of love, because it's a love that is an active love. It's like if I say I love my wife. We're having our anniversary next week. I love my wife. That's filial. I bought my wife an anniversary gift. That may be a sign of agapeo. Because agapeo is active. You look at like Paul in 1 Corinthians 13 when he talks about agapeo, agape. It's patient, it's kind, never envious, boastful, arrogant, or rude. That's what he says is love. Those aren't emotions. I don't emotionally feel that. Those are decisions. I can choose to be rude, right? I can choose to be kind. I can choose to be arrogant. Or I can choose to be humble. That doesn't just happen emotionally. Those are decisions. Agapeo is a decision to be loving, which means I can love someone I don't like. I can feel agapeo when I don't feel phileo. In that passage where Jesus asked Peter, in Greek, in English, it's love, 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 love. Jesus says, Peter, do you agapeo? Are you willing to be actively love? Are you committed to doing loving acts for me? Peter's response is, Lord, I phileo. Lord, I like you. I'm emotionally connected to you. And so he says something that's very hard. If you agapeo, you will be feeding lambs. And feeding lambs is hard. That's challenging. Peter, do you agapeo? Peter says, I phileo. And Jesus says, well, if you agapeo, you're going to tend sheep. And I'll tell you, y'all, a lot of folks here grew up on farms. Tending sheep involves a whole lot more than feeding them. That's hard. The third time Jesus says, and this is fascinating, he says, Peter, do you phileo? And Peter says, I do. I phileo. And then Jesus gives him the easiest thing of all, feeding sheep, which is easier than feeding lambs. Which now this whole thing, the goal is to be actively loving, but even if we never get past an emotional connection to Jesus, there's still something we can do. We can still do something. We can feed sheep. We may never be able to feed lambs or tend sheep, but we can sure feed them. And to me, that's really exciting. But that's a word play. He's playing with these two words that we completely lose in English because we translate it love, 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 love. So it becomes confusing. We're going to see a word play in Jesus with Nicodemus. Same kind of thing. John loves them. John loves these little word plays. One other thing, and we're going to see it again with Nicodemus, a characteristic is people will, and woman at the well, same situation. Jesus will make a statement, the person will misunderstand what he means. In John, over and over, woman at the well, Jesus says, I'm going to give you water, living water. Woman says, where's the bucket? You don't have a bucket. We, the reader, says, what is wrong with her? Of course he's talking about something deeper than that. Is she dense? Yeah. Characteristic in John. She says something that is goofy, and then it gives Jesus what? The opportunity to explain it. And this is a pattern John uses over and over and over and over again. And we're going to see the same thing with Nicodemus. Okay, if you've got any questions, this is just a little background on John. File it away because we're going to see it in the Nicodemus story. You got Bibles? Okay, if you would open it, go, of course, Gospel of John. We've got 3 passages. 2 of them are very, very short. But we're going to see something really interesting happen with Nicodemus. And I think it'll speak to the point you were making, the concern you had, which may be jumping ahead in the series. But we're looking at that figure. Okay, first, turn to chapter 3, because that's when Nicodemus, John introduces Nicodemus into the story. And when you look at it, we're just going to go through the passage, so you want to keep it open, you just follow along. And one other thing, just as a reminder, most of the questions I ask are not deep and profound. I'm not looking for hard, a lot of them are right in the text, so we can kind of move that way. How is Nicodemus introduced?
To the Pharisees.
Okay, we've got a Pharisee named Nicodemus. Now again, valuable. Papyrus valuable. Therefore, we assume John has a reason. You don't have to say that Nicodemus is a Pharisee. It must be really important that he's a Pharisee. Now, what do we know about Pharisees?
They're the Jewish ruling.
Okay, it's one of these Jewish groups. You got several Jewish groups. Pharisees and Sadducees. Pharisees are the ones that were kind of focused on law, on following the law, and also on that Jews follow the law. So Pharisees kind of like to be to themselves. Pharisees weren't looking to get other people to be Jews. Pharisees kind of wanted it to be inside. Now, the Pharisees kind of liked the Romans, because if the Romans left them alone, which the Romans tended to do, because the Romans only cared about money, they would leave the Pharisees alone, Pharisees would leave the Romans alone. Peace. So the Pharisees, had this kind of interesting relationship with the Romans. They kind of wanted to be left to themselves to follow their laws, and since the Romans were only concerned about money, who cares? As long as they pay their taxes, we're cool. Sadducees were another group. They were centered around temple worship. Zadok, and that's the Hebrew word from which Sadducees come, that means righteous. So the Sadducees were viewed as the righteous ones. They were centered around temple worship. They were the group, and they weren't just priests, common people. They would have arguments in the street. One person said, obeying the law is most important. Somebody else said, no, sacrificing in the temple was most. That's the difference between Sadducees and Pharisees. And Sadducees, they were the holy ones centered on the temple worship, sacrificial, that you had to preserve that. Now, they were the ones that caused the Romans trouble, because they also thought, since they were so focused on the temple, they thought that we should have a new, temple worship, little like kind of the Taliban in a Jewish way. They didn't want other groups there, around. They wanted it to be a religious government in Jerusalem, and the Romans were not religious, not Jewish. The Romans were open to a lot of different religions, and that really ticked the Pharisees off. In fact, a little story about the Pharisees. And they believed big on you had to be Jewish blood. And King Herod, with Jesus and all, well, he wasn't Jewish. King Herod was what was called an Edomian, and they were descendants of Edom. And so he wasn't Jewish he was Jewish by religion, but not by blood. And the Sadducees believed you had to be by blood. Well, one of the Herods later, in Jerusalem, Herod Agrippa, who shows up in Acts, he had his palace, and the palace of the king, when he visited Jerusalem, was next to the temple. And what Herod did, this is a trip, so his guests would have nice sort of entertainment while they were eating dinner. You go to a restaurant, you see TVs up. He didn't have TVs back then, so that his guests could have entertainment when they had dinner. He put his dining room on an upper story in his palace, overlooking the temple, where they sacrificed the animals. So his dinner guests could be eating dinner and watching the priests sacrifice the animals in the temple courtyard, on the altar. Which is good for your appetite, right? That nothing makes you want to eat more than seeing them kill a bull. So, and anyway, and that's what they did. And he'd have different people there, and he'd watch it. Well, that ticked the Sadducees really off, because he wasn't Jewish. He wasn't Jewish by blood. And so what the Sadducees did was they built a wall high enough at the temple to block his view. So he couldn't look at the sacrifices because that was profane. Those were the Pharisees. The Sadducees are going to be the ones that are going to encourage the revolution in Palestine in the year 70. And when the Romans destroy the temple, the Romans destroy the Sadducees. So they cease to exist. Because once you have no temple, you have no reason to be one of the righteous ones. Okay, so Pharisees, very different than Sadducees. That's what when you read in the Bible, the Pharisees and the Sadducees getting together, Lord have mercy. It's like modern Democrats and Republicans. Geez, that ain't going to happen. They ain't even going to eat dinner together, because they're going to be fighting and scrapping. So that's kind of what we have. So we know he's a Pharisee. He's part of this group. He also, how else is he described?
Who, Jesus?
Nicodemus.
No, Nicodemus.
He is a Pharisee, which means he is this law-oriented guy, one of the sect within Judaism that is focused on the law. What else does John tell us about? He's a leader of the Jews. And one of the other things to file away, just file in the back of your head whenever you're reading John. When you're reading Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus' enemies are the scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Herodians, by name. In the Gospel of John, John will say the enemy are the Jews. The Jews are the enemy. The other Gospels, it's groups within Judaism. For John, it is the Jews. Now, that tells us a little bit about John's audience. That evidently John's audience is a church that's facing persecution from the Jews. So they see Jews as enemies, so they can identify with that. I don't think John is suggesting if a Jew isn't your enemy, you make him one. It's not.
Yeah.
That's not what he's saying. He's saying to his audience, the bad guys, they're the ones that are persecuting you. They persecuted Jesus. So the other gospel evangelists aren't dealing with audiences, the same kind of audience. So he's a leader of the Jews. So we get right in verse 1, we have an impression of Nicodemus, don't we? From Scripture. What is our impression? Bang, immediately, of Nicodemus.
He's a boss.
He is what?
A boss.
He's a boss. What kind of boss?
Strict.
Strict boss. Yeah.
Jewish boss.
Okay. Strict boss. What else?
Jewish boss.
Jewish boss. And we know about those Jews. We know about those Jews. They're enemies, right? They're the ones that nailed Jesus to a cross. They're Christ killers. They're the ones persecuting us. So our impression of Nicodemus is not good. We do not have a good impression of Nicodemus from verse 1. As we're reading this, John has given us, he's shaping our impression of it. If he had just said Nicodemus came to Jesus, we don't know who he is. But he said, Nicodemus, who is a Pharisee, leader of the Jews, and then to make matters worse, when did he come to Jesus?
At night.
By night. Jeez Louise. Can we get worse? So Nicodemus is coming out of what? What is Nicodemus literally coming out of when he goes to see Jesus?
Darkness.
Darkness! Nicodemus is in the dark. Man, I'm worn out. In a verse and a half, John has told us exactly how we're supposed to feel about Nicodemus. And it's what?
Not good.
It's not good! It's not good, not unlike my Uncle Chuck. So Nicodemus is there. Now, Nicodemus, so we've got this negative impression. He's come in to see Jesus, and what does he say?
To Jesus, you mean?
What does he say to Jesus?
We know you're a God.
Well, first, before he says anything, what's the first thing he says?
Rabbi.
Rabbi. Okay, bang again. We've gone through chapter 1 and 2. People who have any sense of faith, and I'm thinking we'll see this again a little bit later. Like when he called Nathaniel in the Gospel of Matthew, Gospel of John, Nathaniel immediately knows Jesus is what? Son of God.
Son of God.
Man, that's in chapter 1. John the Baptist said, Lamb of God, takes away the sins of the world. There he is. So These are statements we, the reader, have read. John 1 through 18. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Lord have mercy. We know who Jesus is. This is the best Nicodemus can come up with. The title, what? Teacher, rabbi. So we are not overly impressed at this point with Nicodemus. Okay? And I think that's what John, again, we're looking at how the evangelists are shaping our perceptions. Because that's what they're doing. Just like you do when you watch a thing on television, just like the presentation. They're shaping your understanding, how you feel about the different characters, if they're doing their job well. Okay, so now what does he say? So he says that, or it says rabbi, and then what does he say?
We know you are a teacher who has come from God.
We know you're a teacher who has come from God. Well, we, the reader, what do we already know about Jesus?
He's the Son of God.
He's a heck of a lot more than a teacher who's come from God. He's Son of God. So Jesus, Nicodemus doesn't, he really doesn't get it yet.
Yeah.
Because he's a teacher. And then he says, I know he's a teacher because of
What he's doing.
what he's doing. And what does he call what he's doing?
Miraculous.
Signs.
Signs. And signs are something else really important in John. We get signs. And he just uses the word over and over again. This is a sign. People are seeking signs. We've already seen in chapters 1 and 2. Signs. What were the two? There were two things that Jesus called signs himself in 1 and 2. You remember the first sign? The first thing that Jesus says, this is a sign in chapter 2. Only in the Gospel of John. Jesus and Mary are where? At a wedding.
Yes.
Wedding supper.
And he does changes water into wine.
Yeah.
Boom, that's a sign. Now, we can, since weddings are a big deal in Jewish theology, wine is a big deal. Sign, of this wonderful, benevolent thing going on. So, that's a sign. He cleanses the temple, which again is something different in John, because he cleanses the temple in the Gospel of John in what point in his ministry?
The beginning.
Right at the beginning. In the other Gospels, he cleanses the temple
At the end.
right at the end. And understand, in John, we got a 3-year ministry. He goes to Jerusalem, 3 Passovers. So in the other Gospels is 1 year. In John, Gospel of John, Jesus is doing his thing for 3 years because it's 3 different Passovers. So much longer ministry, but the cleansing of the temple is at the beginning, not the end. Again, that fits what John wants us, what he's communicating. But we're not looking at that. We're just looking at Nicodemus. Okay, so Nicodemus says this. He doesn't know who Jesus is. We know that because we know Jesus is more than a rabbi, than a teacher. Okay. Now, how does Jesus, and it's fascinating, this is what Nicodemus says, how does Jesus respond?
He tells them the truth.
Well, he says, very true. Amen in Hebrew, in Greek, amen, amen. I tell you, then what?
Can't get through the kingdom of God unless he's born again.
No one can see the kingdom of God without being born asterisk. Because this is going to be a wordplay. This is going to be a little wordplay here that he does. Now, fascinating, Jesus responds to a question that Nicodemus didn't ask. I mean, Nicodemus didn't ask this. But Jesus responds to something that is not asked. Now, it says kingdom of God. What is kingdom of God? What does that mean? What is the kingdom of God? And in the Gospel of John, he doesn't use kingdom of God much. We don't see that much in John. See it a lot in Mark and Luke. See kingdom of heaven a lot in Matthew. But we don't see it much in the Gospel of John. So what does it mean? What is kingdom of God?
God's entire.
Okay.
But he believes what God is.
Okay, what God's rule.
Yes.
God's rule is the kingdom of God. So God's rule is God. You can't see, then what he's saying is you can't see what? The rule of God. You can't see the presence, the activity, the rule, the authority of God unless you've been
Born.
asterisk. Because it's a little interesting word. Because the Greek word here And again, we lose it in English. We don't have it in English. The Greek word is anothein. Anothein is the Greek word used here. And anothein as an adjective has two meanings. Now, we have no comparable English word like it. It's not like this love business. Anothein has two meanings. It can mean again, or it can mean above. The same word has two different meanings. And the only way you can tell, does the speaker mean again or above, is context. I mean, that's the only way you can tell. Because there are two different meanings. Now, when Jesus says this, we don't know what he means. Is he talking about above, or is he talking about below? Again. You know, is he saying, is this born again or born from above? We don't know based on the Greek. So if I'm translating it, like every English translator, that translator has to do what?
Decide what it is.
Make a decision. Make a decision. Is it again or is it from above? Only thing we've got is context and knowing that John loves to do plays on words and loves people misunderstanding so that he can explain it. So Jesus makes his statement. Boom. Right? Now, regardless of whether it's again or above, who's in control of this? By what Jesus said, who's in control?
God is.
God is. You know, God is. I've never known when I was born, I didn't say to Mom, you know, Mom, I think I'm going to be born on July 2nd. Let's make that the 4th so that I can believe that the national independence, it's all about me. You know, so Mom, can you delay that for 2 days?
Yeah, celebrate me.
Yeah, so we could celebrate.
Me.
Yeah, it's pretty much out of my hands. You know, so either way, whether it's above or again, it's in God's hands whether we're born again or whether we're born from above. It's in God's hands. Okay, now, so he says, he makes this statement. Now, again, we know John is notorious, or it's a characteristic of John, is to have people misunderstand. Right?
Yes.
So, and Nicodemus, we already know that he misunderstands because he doesn't know who Jesus is. Calls him a teacher, right? So, how does Nicodemus respond to what Jesus said?
How can a man be born?
How can a man be born after he is old? Right? How can he enter his mother's womb second time? Now, clearly, Nicodemus is taking anothein as what? Again. Clearly, he's taking anothein as again. Now, for us, knowing how John writes, that becomes a clue. That maybe Jesus, because we know people misunderstand a lot, like the woman at the well. We'll see in the next chapter. You know, that probably Jesus didn't mean again because Nicodemus kind of misunderstood what he was saying. Not that I don't think it mattered. I don't think it's crucial. But real good chance that Jesus meant above and not again when he said what he said. Because Nicodemus thinks it's again, and Nicodemus is dumb as a post. You know, when it comes to Jesus, he is just dumb as a post. You know, and that's the way John wants us to see him. He is clueless about it. He's coming from the dark. He's in the dark. He doesn't know. All right, how does Jesus respond to him? Amen, amen, again he says. Again, amen, amen, I tell you. Then what?
He says, no one can enter you tell him the truth, that you can't enter the kingdom of God unless he's born of water and the Spirit.
Water and the Spirit. Okay, which, again, Nicodemus has misunderstood. Jesus isn't talking about a physical birth. He's talking about spiritual birth. But water and spirit, which is kind of interesting. Again, if we were going to look at what Jesus, not at Nicodemus, but what Jesus is talking about here, water is another thing that's really important. And I think that becomes almost a baptismal image. Remember when the soldier, and this is only in John, stabs Jesus with a spear, what comes out of him is blood and water. Blood and water. Which, if you think about it in sacramental terms, blood associated with communion, water associated with baptism. So you've got those coming from Jesus. You know, it becomes kind of symbolic. You know, that coming from the crucified Christ is the two sacraments that, are celebrated in the early church. Kind of interesting stuff. But so it's, water here, water and spirit. And then Jesus continues to explain. And again, we're looking at Nicodemus. We're not necessarily looking at what Jesus is getting at here. That's another story. And he continues to explain, right? And what does Jesus continue to do as he explains? Because he says water and spirit, and then in verse 6 he's explaining more, right? Mm-hmm. And what does he say?
Flesh gives birth to flesh, but the spirit gives birth to spirit.
Now, when Nicodemus made his bonehead response, well, how can I be born again when I'm going to be physically born again? Duh. Jesus says, look,
Keep up with me.
flesh is flesh. Flesh is flesh. But spirit is a little bit different, Nicodemus. Let's get off. And so don't be astonished that I say you must be born. Again, that word, that has two meanings. The wind blows where it chooses, you hear, but you don't know where it comes from. So is everyone who's born of the Spirit. Now, again, a little play on words here. Because in Greek, pneuma is the Greek word for spirit. That's why Daniel has what? Pneumonia. They call it pneumonia because it's based on the Greek word pneuma. And pneuma can be translated different ways, again, based on context. It can mean spirit. It can also mean breath. It can also mean breath. That's why pneumonia, what Bus went through, is breath, pneumonia. You can't breathe. Pneumonia has to do with that. It also can be translated wind. And so can the Hebrew word that sort of underlies it, called ruach, is the same thing. Ruach can mean spirit. That's what God breathed in to Adam, that hunk of clay.
Yeah.
He breathed in ruach, which is translated breath or spirit. Same word. Again, in English, we got two words. So you got to choose which one you're going to use. In Hebrew, you don't have to choose because it's one word. Breath and spirit are the same word. Same thing happening here in Greek. When we're talking about, so that's why he can talk about the wind. Or the translator has taken pneuma and chosen one place to translate it spirit and translated wind somewhere else. But it's the same word being used here. It's the same word. So Jesus is talking about something that is happening and comparing the spirit to wind. And what's the characteristic of wind?
Can't see it.
You can't see it, and you can't.
know it's there.
You know it's there. You can't see it, you can't control it, but you know it's there. And how do you know it's there?
You feel it.
Because you feel it. Because you feel it. Okay. Now, Nicodemus, right? He's really been good to this point, right? Our impression of Nicodemus to this point? Then what does Nicodemus say in verse 9?
How can this be?
Yeah, that's right. That's a great translation. That's really good. I like that. I never thought of that, but that's right. That's exactly. Maybe that's in the Living Bible.
No, it's not what I read.
Yeah. Because that's what he says. He says, "How can these things be?" And again, looking at John's style of writing. How can these things? What do we know is going to happen? Jesus is going to launch into this monologue, right? And that's what we get in John. We get Jesus making these long monologues where he explains all this stuff. You don't see that in the other Gospels. You don't have Jesus. Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is a long time, but you could break them into little tiny lessons. In John, Jesus does these long, kind of soliloquies, these long monologues where he explains all this stuff. And what John does is he sets us up for it. When Nicodemus says, it's like saying, "Tell me more, Jesus." Well, I will. And then he launches off, which is a lot of good stuff in there. And then I think John, just as a reminder that our view of Nicodemus, he probably doesn't want us to feel better about him yet. Mm-hmm. What's the first thing that Jesus says before he launches into, and this of course will be, the whole, the one verse you see on samplers on walls. For God so loved World. Yeah. But, so it's going into probably one of the most famous little passages in Scripture. But before he even gets into that, what does he say to Nicodemus?
He says, you're a teacher, how can you not know
How
this
can
stuff?"
you not understand this stuff? And in Greek, you can phrase a question that implies an answer. So you can phrase it in a way that the answer is going to be yes or no. Like if I say to you, now you're going to the store today, aren't you? What answer do I want? Or what answer do I expect? Yeah, I expect the answer yes. If I ask, are you going to the store? It could be yes or no, but you are going to the store today, aren't you? That sure means if you're not going to the store, maybe you should. Or if I say to you, you're not going to the store today, are you?
No, you're not supposed to.
No, you're not supposed to. And that, well, you shouldn't. It implies, and this is one of those questions that implies a negative answer. So the answer, he's just not asking a question like, well, I don't know. It's, you don't know this?
And they don't accept it anyway.
Yeah, well, you're not.
What he says.
What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
So as we leave this first passage that deals with Nicodemus, what's our impression of him? What do we know about him?
That he's not very bright.
He's not very bright. And I mean, it's okay to say that, because I think that is exactly what John wants us to see. Because he hasn't done anything here to lift Nicodemus up. There's nothing in this that would cause you to say, well, he's a bright guy. He just missed the boat. He had a bad day. No, there's nothing that John tells us that would cause us to. So he's not very bright. What else?
Do you think it implies that he's choosing not to understand?
Maybe. He's certainly in the dark. And that's great because in the first chapter when he says, when the light comes in, John says, but the people chose darkness rather than the light. So I think that's an excellent point. John's already established that people can choose darkness rather than light, or that's a characteristic of humanity. So yeah, I think that you could say that Nicodemus is choosing to be in the dark. That's where he's. Yeah, he comes at night.
I think that's one of the things I saw in the Chosen series, is that Nicodemus wanted to believe, or did believe, but he didn't want to commit. Mm-hmm. But he chose to support Jesus' ministry, okay. From what was shown on the the Chosen series.
Okay, good, because this is one. So our first impression of Nicodemus is not a good one. Mm-hmm. He's not bright. He's part of the enemy. He's part of this little group. He's in darkness, maybe by choice, but he's certainly in darkness. He's a teacher of the law and doesn't understand what teachers should understand. Okay, boom, that's it. Chapter 3. Jump ahead to chapter 7. Now these other two are very, very short because this is all we've got of Nicodemus in the Gospel of John. And therefore in the whole New Testament. John chapter 7, beginning in verse 45. Now we're going to kind of pick and choose as we go through this. Now what has happened before verse 45 is relatively important. The chief priests and the Pharisees and the scribes. And understand, chief priests and Pharisees did not get along. When he says chief priests and Pharisees, we see that as, okay, chief priests were hanging out with Pharisees. Oh, okay.
Exactly.
They hated one another. Yeah. Trump Republicans, Biden Democrats, they're going to fight with one another. They're going to call one another names. It's not going to be pretty. So these are two groups that don't like each other. They don't like them personally. They think each one thinks they're going to hell. They're destroying Judaism. They hate one another. With a passion, they hate one another. So whenever you see in Scripture, Sadducees and Pharisees hanging out, that ain't the case. This isn't peaceful Jewish cooperation. This isn't like Methodists and Presbyterians getting together. We don't fight and scrap anymore. But
But they united for a cause.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think that's what the writers are emphasizing, that these two dissimilar groups, and then when you add the Herodians, geez, neither one of those liked the Herodians, because the Herodians were turncoats, so they didn't like any of them. So, uniting shows that they're uniting in a cause.
Yeah.
The opposition is strong. So, but they're looking to get Jesus, right? And they send these police to arrest him, because they've decided he's going to be arrested, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. And clearly in verse 45, the scribes and the Pharisees expected Jesus to be arrested, but the chief priests or the police say what?
They asked him why they didn't bring him in.
Yeah, why didn't you bring him in? I expected to see somebody in handcuffs. Where is he? And the police say,
no one has ever spoken
man,
the way this man.
this guy is something.
And they never touched him.
That's right.
They never laid a hand on him.
That's right. This guy's really something. One of the things, too, you file away in John. Jesus is in control in John. In the other Gospels, things seem to get out of hand. But in John, Jesus is in control. Even to the point where when he's carrying his cross, if you look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, when he's carrying his cross to Golgotha, mm-hmm. What happens as he's carrying his cross?
He stumbles.
Okay, and what do?
They whip him.
They get Joseph.
They get, that's it. They get, it's not Joseph, but it's Simon of Cyrene. They get Simon of Cyrene, who's in town to carry the cross. And in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So somebody carries his cross because Jesus is beaten and tired and all this stuff. Not in John. In fact, John it makes a point to say, Jesus carried the cross himself. So Jesus carries the cross all the way to Golgotha himself. There's no Simon of Cyrene in John, because Jesus is in control. When he goes on the cross in Matthew and Mark, what are Jesus' last words from the cross?
Father, I commend my soul to you.
Luke, that's in Luke.
Oh,
You're
okay.
right. He says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you? Everybody else has forsaken me. Now why have you forsaken me? We talk about a cry of abandonment, right? Fear. Isolation. What is, in the Gospel of John, what is Jesus doing from the cross? Making living arrangements for his mother.
Yep.
Lord, have mercy. And then ends, his last words in John are, it is finished. And it is. He's done. His job here is done. He's heading home. So it's a whole different feel. The cross feels entirely different in John than it does in Matthew and Mark. Why? Because Jesus is in control. Even when they arrest him. It says in John, they come to arrest him, and what do? The soldiers that arrest him, they fall on the ground in John. And Jesus allows himself to be arrested. At all these points, Jesus could have said, I'm not going to do this.
And he stops which one? From
Oh, yeah. Well, in the other Gospels, we kind of get this saying, we got things out of control. Things are going nuts. We don't get that in John. Jesus, when he's talking to Pilate, man, Jesus is in control of this conversation. Every encounter, Jesus is in control. And that's what John wants. John wants us to see Jesus as the one who does have control. Not the one that the world can overcome, but the one who overcomes the world. Now that's John's point. Matthew, Mark, particularly Mark, Jesus is the one who suffers for us. One's not right and the other wrong. It's just two different views of who Jesus is, both of which are important to Christians later. Okay, so anyway, he's here. They don't arrest him. Not a surprise, because Jesus is only arrested when he allows himself to be arrested. And the Pharisees say what to the soldiers when they make that?
Why didn't you bring him in?
Yeah, they said, we've never heard anybody like that. And how do the Pharisees respond?
You mean he has deceived you also?
Irony. Boom. Has Jesus deceived you? Well, we the reader say,
That's not a deception.
yeah, the soldier, yes. The police aren't being deceived. Who's being deceived? They are. The one who made the comment, they're the ones who are deceived, right? And then he, but the crowd which does not know the law, they are accursed. Huh? The crowds that are following, they're the ones who are accursed? Who's accursed? We the reader say.
They are.
They are the ones who are making the accusation. That, sisters, is irony. That is irony. And like I said, John uses it, all the time. That they are accursed, that they are deceived. Verse 50, who appears? We haven't seen him. Oh, I've missed him so much since chapter 3. Oh, where has he been? Who shows up in verse 50? Nicodemus! And just because John is a good writer, all these evangelists are good writers. John wants to make sure we the reader, and we haven't seen Nicodemus in a long time. John tells us what?
He went to Jesus.
Do you remember the story about the guy who went to Jesus? All right. And so he tells us, this is the Nicodemus who went to Jesus before. What else does he tell us about him?
He's one of them.
One of them. Which means scribes and Pharisees. He's one of them. So now we kind of get this kind of interesting what John is doing. Here's a guy that went to Jesus. And is that a good thing to go to Jesus?
Sure is.
Always.
Yeah, it's a good thing. So, Nicodemus went to Jesus. One of them. Is that good? Kind of a mixed bag here. When we left chapter 3, Nicodemus was, a dope. He was pretty bad. Now, he went to Jesus, but he's one of them. Sort of in the middle. Now maybe we need to take a second look at Nicodemus a little bit. What does he say?
He says, does our law condemn anyone without first hearing him to find out what he is doing?
Now again, this is another question that demands a negative answer. In Greek. So he's not asking this to get information. He's asking it, he already knows the answer. And the answer is what?
We have to give him a chance to explain himself.
Well, right. Our law does not judge without first giving a person to answer. Does it? Well, the answer is no, that's right. The law doesn't do that. The law doesn't do that. So now that's kind of interesting. Because in this, Nicodemus in what he says is what?
Supporting Christ.
Supporting Christ. He's right in what he asked. And this is kind of pro-Christ. Or at least giving Jesus the opportunity to speak. He's not saying I believe or anything like that. And understand, and John, people have said I believe. They called him Son of God. So that's not unusual in John. He's not saying that. He's just saying, even the law says we got to listen to this guy, right? Right?
Exactly.
And how did they respond? Which again helps us, the reader. People we know are the enemy because they look at it, arrest him and kill him. How do they respond to Nicodemus?
Are you from Galilee?
Are you from Galilee?
Yeah.
Diss him.
Again, this is a diss. Yeah, and this is another question that implies a positive answer this time. Are you from Galilee, aren't you? This was a diss. Being called a Galilean for a Jew is.
Isn't that what one of the disciples, I can't remember which one, says? How can anything good come out of Galilee?
Right. And do you know the reason why they would say that? Why we would say no? But Galilee was an interesting place because the different places had a stronger Gentile presence. As you move closer to Jerusalem, you had more intensely Jewish population and more Sadducees and Zealots, were there, and Zealots were political, new nation kind of thing. It became stronger and stronger as you got closer to Jerusalem. Not unlike as you get closer and closer to Richmond, Virginia, you move into the heartland of the South.
Oh, yeah. And the crime and
Well, we don't talk about that. But you can't go further south than Richmond. Anyway, as you move to Jerusalem, it gets more intensely Jewish. So the Jewish presence is less in Galilee. Galilee is sort of a mixture.
Isn't it close to Samaria?
Well, it's Galilee. Samaria is a little bit south of what is going to be Judea. Judea, when Herod makes a deal with the Caesars, and the Caesars make him king, because that's what happened to Herod the Great. And his grandson, Herod Agrippa. They give him a big territory, which will include Samaria. Galilee is even further away from Jerusalem than Samaria.
Oh, okay.
Galilee is far north. Now we're pushing towards Damascus. Now we're pushing towards, Tyre, Sidon. Now we're moving further away. And so it was a mixed race in language, ethnic backgrounds, religion. It was really a mixture. I mean, the capital of Galilee was, Caesarea Philippi is in Galilee, named after Caesar. It becomes a place where the Roman influence is more. It's ruled by a Jewish tetrarch, sort of sub-king, but it's viewed as, they will call it the Galilee of the nations, because Galilee is kind of a melting pot. You got a lot of ideas. From the east, from the west, from the north, south, you had a lot of stuff going on in Galilee. So it was sort of a mixture. And so people didn't look at Galilee in a religious sense as being dedicated. You did Judea, because that's where the Jews hung out. But Galilee, you had a lot of those ideas floating around Galilee.
A little more liberal?
Well, a little more, you just had more stuff going on in Galilee. And that's why Jesus and the evangelists, evidently it was well known that Jesus came from Galilee, lived in Nazareth. And that becomes a huge issue for the Jews, because the Messiah of the Jews shouldn't come from Galilee, should be coming closer to Jerusalem. And so, how do we get Jesus close to Jerusalem? If he's in Galilee, if we know he was a little boy in Galilee. Well, Matthew and Luke have the story in Bethlehem. Mark doesn't care. John doesn't have any birth story, because his birth story is in the beginning was the Word, which is an origin story. But, he'll say, Jesus will say, where I came from doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that I came from Galilee. I'm the Son of God. I came from God. I didn't come from Galilee. You're talking in earthly terms. I'm talking in heavenly terms. And so they're dealing with, how do I explain this? Because Galilee wasn't looked at as a great place to come from for a Jew, for a good Jew. Okay, so making that accusation is really, really a big diss. And no prophet has come from Galilee. Prophets don't come from Galilee. Man, that's the other side of the tracks. Now, as we read that, what's our impression of Nicodemus? Now, if initially our impression was negative, now how do we feel about it?
More positive.
I feel sorry for him. Now they're picking on him.
Yeah, now they're picking on him. And you feel sorry for him, you feel a little more positive. They're picking on him because
He isn't dissing Jesus.
yeah, he doesn't want to diss Jesus. He doesn't want to join them. Okay? So our impression of him is kind of improving a little bit, isn't it? Now we get the last time Nicodemus is mentioned in chapter 19. Now, since John only has 21 chapters, and the resurrection occurs in chapter 20, chapter 19 must have something to do with what?
Crucifixion.
Must have something to do with crucifixion. And so we're looking at the end of chapter 19, verse 38, beginning in verse 38. And what happens in verse 38?
Nicodemus asked for the body.
Well, Joseph of Arimathea asks for who? And John tells us, what about Joseph?
He went with him.
Well, he's a disciple. So we know who he is. We know Joseph is one of the disciples. Joseph of Arimathea. Now, we don't get that in the other Gospels, but John tells us. So we know that Joseph is in this inside group, is a follower, a believer in Jesus, right? And what else does John tell us?
That it was secret.
Yeah, it was going to be secret because the
Fear
Jews, again, the Jews are on the case. He's scared of the Jews because the Jews are the enemy, not the Pharisees, not the chief, the Jews, which everybody in John's church can identify with it. Nobody in Sligo Presbyterian can identify with it because no Jews are looking to get us. We're pretty safe from Jewish persecution. But But not the case in John's church. They are facing real problems, evidently. So, they could identify with it. So he asked Pilate for the body. Now, crucifixion has already occurred, right? So they want Jesus's body, right? And who appears in verse 39? Nicodemus. Haven't seen him now since chapter 7. Chapter 3, chapter 7. Now he shows up in chapter 19. And again, John wants us to know who Nicodemus is. And how did he describe Nicodemus?
It came to him.
He came to Jesus by night, remember? Now, I think it's really interesting that, again, he mentions night. Because he reminds us that again, he's talking about this is in past and perfect tense, but it refers to the past, right? This guy in the past was in the dark, right? Came to Jesus by night. You remember that? Way in the past. Now, understand, this was 3 years ago, using John's chronology. This was 3 years ago. This wasn't like 6 months. This is a long time ago. Okay, what does Nicodemus bring?
A mixture of myrrh and aloes and 75 pounds of stuff.
That's a
Yeah.
lot of money.
Man, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
We've got stuff coming in for the soup. Jeez Louise. This is a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Right? He's bringing that. Why is he doing that?
Because they were going to preserve his body.
That he's bringing spices
To anoint the body.
to
yeah,
anoint.
there you go.
Preserve. Well, it's the same thing. You anoint, preserve. The body. Now, what does this show about Nicodemus here?
His whole attitude towards Christ has changed.
It's
Or
changed.
the attitude that we're to assume has changed.
And as Mark presents it,
Yeah, as John presents
we're doing Mark, so I keep on saying Mark. As John presents it, we get Nicodemus's attitude through the whole gospel, because he's in the 3rd chapter and in the 19th. His whole presentation, and he only shows up 3 times, but each of those times represent a shift.
It shows a transformation.
A transformation, even though we're not following it. Boom, 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 boom. We see this transformation. And we do have, now, really important that we're not talking about the Spirit yet. Because the Spirit's not going to come until the 20th chapter in the Gospel of John. Because that's when they gather the disciples and he breathes on them and says, receive the Holy Spirit. That's how of John's Pentecost, where Jesus breathes in them. Breath, spirit, pneuma, that kind of jazz. So breathes into the Holy Spirit. So we're not talking about Nicodemus being filled with the Spirit yet, because nobody is. The Spirit hasn't come until the next chapter. But we do see that Nicodemus has made profound changes. That he is now willing to bring the stuff that you needed to anoint the body. So in the Gospel of John, and this I find really cool, we get this changing of Nicodemus, but if you're not looking for it, you don't see it, because his presentations are so isolated. After chapter 3, his name is mentioned twice. Boom, once in chapter 7, once in chapter 19. But in the way it's mentioned, so you see, and I think that's really cool. John the writer, is really conscious of what he's doing. He hits his transformation, even though he mentions his person 3 times. Nicodemus only 3 times. So, as we go through the story, what happens to Nicodemus? He changes. He changes. He changes. Why would that be important? Why is that so important that John wanted to put this character, who's really a minor character, and he's only mentioned 3 times in 21
I think it
chapters.
shows the potential that we have also.
Okay.
And the power of Jesus.
And the power of Jesus to change us, the change that can occur, even someone who is in the dark and is dumb as a post.
Especially somebody who's in the dark and comes post.
Has the possibility
Yeah,
of change.
so there's hope for the rest
So
of us.
yes. And so as you look at the other chosen episodes, you keep in mind, what you were saying about Nicodemus, oh, it's really a shame, he seemed to want, but he just couldn't. Well, if we look at how he's presented in the Gospel of John, the change is going to occur. It's going to occur. But it's kind of in the background.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's in the background.
And it was interesting in Chosen, it was, Nicodemus was being elevated to go to Jerusalem from wherever they were that was further away. And he had to make the choice of whether to follow Jesus or to, and he was in tears over the fact that he couldn't give up what he had, you know, the world to follow Jesus. And he dropped the coin purse for them to pick up so that they would finance the next leg in the trip and stuff. That's where I found it very interesting.
Nicodemus. Any questions about the person as he is presented in Scripture?
It's someone from the dark being brought into the light.
Yep, that's exactly right. Someone who was in the dark is now in the light. By the end of the story, he's in the light. He had been in the dark. He had been in the dark, but now he's not. So wonderful, wonderful, wonderful little story. Would you like to do this again next week, or would you want somebody else to do, or and that's fine with me. Because if not, we can look at Mary Magdalene. And Mary Magdalene is going to be an interesting figure, really interesting, because she's in all four Gospels as opposed to Nicodemus. But probably more, how do I want to put it? And this could be thanks in part to our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters and their history. More mythology has grown up around Mary Magdalene than maybe anyone else, any other character in the gospel stories. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that next week. Mary Magdalene, the figure of Mary, and maybe expanded to some of the other women because Mary isn't really mentioned all that much in the Gospels. The women that are with her and how the different evangelists handle these women, because each one looks at the women in a slightly different way, which is cool. Okay, well, then let's have a word of prayer. Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this time together, and bless us as we go about our living. Remind us that even people like Nicodemus, even people like us, can move from the darkness into the light. And help us to do that ourselves, to remain in the light ourselves. And Lord God, help us encourage others to do the same. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen.